Crystal Dynamics have had a pretty good run in the gaming industry. Love it or hate it, the Gex games were adept platformers with a lot of charm. Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver, I think, was one of the best action-adventure games made for the PlayStation, and recently they've been doing some pretty good work with the Tomb Raider series. Whether or not you're a fan of Lara Croft, you do have to appreciate the fact that at one point they put Lara into a one-piece wetsuit. I mean, come on, what are we doing over here? Their one and only foray into the first-person genre, however, was a game called Project Snowblind, released in 2005 for the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox, with a PC port as well. But probably what's most shocking about all of this is the fact that it's not only a pretty good PC port, but Project Snowblind's actually a pretty damn good game as well. Now, this is another game I've had people requesting I review for a long time, and I can't remember the names of everyone who's asked me to do it, but you guys know who you are, so collectively, this is for you. Anyway, now we've got that shit out of the way, the story goes that in this game you're a soldier named Nathan Frost, fighting in Hong Kong for the Liberty Coalition in the year 2065. Things are calm for all of 15 seconds before Nathan's squad is attacked and you're thrust right into battle, coming to grips with the basic mechanics of the game at the same time. The first level's pretty damn boring, but soon enough Nathan ends up getting blown to shit like a complete idiot. And he's then rebuilt as some kind of cybernetic super soldier, becoming the poster boy in the fight against a militant group calling itself the Republic.
Are you well enough to perform your duties? I'm willing to bet my life on it. So am I, Lieutenant. Dismissed.
Something that really surprised me right off the bat about this game was just how well done the cinematics are. The animation and cinematography for these is really well done and highly polished, and it actually makes them watchable and not just like people standing around talking to each other. They've even got James Hong, aka David Lo Pan, in this thing, voicing a scientist you have to rescue about halfway through the campaign. And this guy just steals every single cinematic he's in.
Just imagine. All automated machinery, vehicles, phones, banks, defense networks, everything shut down permanently.
And I reckon I could honestly listen to James Hong read through the entire Twilight Saga without ever wanting to kill myself. And if you don't know who Lo Pan is, well, shame on you.
Now, this really pisses me off to no end.
Overall, you do get the feeling that someone spent a lot of time and effort on these, scripting and storyboarding them to make it dynamic and interesting, and it mostly is, which is a good thing. Now, Project Snowblind was initially planned to be some kind of multiplayer-only successor to Deus Ex Invisible War, and we all know how that game turned out. And there is a lot of mechanics here that feel like they've been ripped straight out of a Deus Ex game. For starters, the setting feels very much like Deus Ex. It's obviously got a cyberpunk theme mixed with an Asian aesthetic, with the events of the game taking place in New York, Paris, and Hong Kong, just like Deus Ex and its multiple hubs. Ultimately, the main antagonist's plan is to detonate an EMP bomb on a global scale, destroying all technology and setting humanity back to the Dark Age, which is similar to one of the 3 endings in the first Deus Ex game where, spoiler alert, JC Denton destroys the Helios AI. Secondly, Frost's abilities are referred to as Augmentations. Now, they include abilities like being able to scan enemies and see them through walls. One that's not entirely necessary on its own, but when you combine it with a weapon like the rail laser, which can fire through walls, it actually becomes pretty useful. Another is the Reflex Booster, which is a fancy name for bullet time, where time slows down but you still move at the same speed, able to maneuver around enemies and take them out quickly. Again, not all that entirely necessary, but it does look cool, and in slow motion you can enjoy some of the physics and animation work in greater detail. Next, there's the Ballistic Shield. Now, this one literally makes you invulnerable for a period of time. Now, this thing kind of trivializes certain gunfights because you can just run around willy-nilly, not worrying too much about the locations of enemies. And even when the shield does run out, you can easily pop up another one without that much of a delay in between. Later in the game, this thing becomes a goddamn godsend and you'll be popping these shields like a can of Pringles. One of the more badass abilities is the Augmentation that lets you fire lightning bolts out of your hands, turning you into some kind of cybernetic Sith Lord. Then lastly, there's the Cloak, rendering you invisible and also making me wish that the game had a more developed stealth system. But I'm hesitant to even call it stealth. I mean, you get a single silenced weapon which doesn't have all that much ammo. Enemies will spot you as soon as you're in their line of sight, and there's not even really any kind of failure when alarms are set off. Project Snowblind does offer up lots of ways to tackle each level in terms of taking a combat or a stealth approach, but the stealth aspect is definitely unrefined. Even still though, you can't really deny the sheer amount of gameplay options available. You can hack into security cameras, turrets, drones, and enemies react to different types of grenades, be it flash, gas, or simple frag grenades. You can use EMP grenades against robotic enemies, you can shoot out security cameras, avoid laser tripwires, and even crawl through vents to find alternate paths through the levels. Curiosity may have killed the cat, but in this game it rewards you, often with upgrades that boost your overall health and bioenergy. You can even hop into vehicles here and there just to break up the tedium of going everywhere on foot. In terms of the weapons, Project Snowblind plays it pretty safe, but it still manages to make things interesting. You've got a pistol, you've got a shotgun, an assault rifle, and a sniper rifle. Now, this kind of thing is par for the course. But there's also a rocket launcher, a grenade launcher, a mine launcher, and later on, and more interestingly, there's a flechette launcher, and a kind of lightning gun that's also good at close range. And of course the rail laser I mentioned before, which is basically a charged up railgun that can shoot through walls like the rail driver in Red Faction. Adding even more depth is the fact that all of these weapons have alternate fire modes, and some of these are actually pretty creative. The grenades also add more depth to the shooting too, and it really gives you a whole heap of options when tackling enemies. You can use a simple frag grenade, which just does some basic explosive damage and is good for clearing out a cluster of bad guys. A flash grenade is good for stunning enemies, leaving them wide open to an attack, but I've found that shooting them in the face does the trick pretty well too. Gas grenades I think are supposed to be non-lethal, not that it really matters all that much, and will stun enemies before knocking them out. Though this gas can also injure the player, and again it's quicker and easier just to shoot them in the face, than to stand there and watch them choke out for 10 seconds. More creative types are the spider grenade, which sends out a little spider bot that runs around for a bit, shocking enemies and taking them out. Lastly, you can even throw out an energy riot shield, which allows you to shoot somewhat safely from behind cover. The only downside to this one is that it can be destroyed by EMP grenades, and you can still take some damage if you're exposed, though compared to being right out in the open, it's a far better option.
Indeed!
What I really like about all of this too is that you can also control when to detonate grenades. You press shift by default to throw one, then shift again to detonate it, which just makes them so easy and fun to use. With all these powers combined, the weapons, shooting and grenades, the combat becomes pretty fluid and dynamic, able to change on a dime depending on how the player wants to handle each encounter. And I think it's part of what makes the game so enjoyable to play. I mean, if you get sick of using the Ballistic Shield and taking out enemies with the flechette gun, then swap to the cloak and sneak up on them with a shotgun before blasting them at point blank range. The power, as a wise man once said, is yours. And if that ain't enough, there's also the game's version of the gravity gun called the Kinetic Kicker. It's got a nice ring to it, where you can push or pull heavy items, which is pretty handy. About the only thing stopping this feeling like a proper Deus Ex game is the linearity of the level design. The levels are open-ended in the sense that you're given free reign in how you want to tackle your objectives, but you're still just going to be going from the same starting point to the same finishing point, not really changing anything in the grand scheme of things. What are the downsides to Project Snowblind? Well, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, the core of the gameplay is pretty damn solid, and about the only things I could complain about would honestly just be nitpicking, which would make me look like some kind of cynical Australian beer-soaked asshole, and only 2 of those are true, so I'm not going to do that. I guess the only thing I don't like about it is that it's such a short game. The first session I had playing this, I probably played for about 2 hours or so, and out of curiosity I looked up a walkthrough to see how far it was. And to my shock, I found out that I was 12 chapters in out of the 18 in total. And it wasn't much longer after that, about another couple hours when I'd finished it. Kinda reminds me of that other game Singularity in a way. They're both similar games where you're a guy that ends up getting special abilities and going up against droves of enemies, and they both clock out just when they're starting to get really interesting.
There you go. Ballistic shielding.
You can replay the campaign, but you start from the beginning and there's no kind of New Game Plus mode or anything to unlock, which just makes it feel so unfulfilling. Is the game's length a valid complaint? Well, I don't really know if it is, but I did notice it. I won't say I'm angry, I'm just disappointed. It's not really a difficult game either, in fact it's kinda piss easy. There was only a couple of times when I died, and that was when I was experimenting with new weapons and kinda forgot to keep an eye on my health bar. There's a really high amount of aim assist in this game too, like to the point that it almost locks onto enemies, and all you really need to do is press the fire button. It's obviously been done because the game's designed to be played with an Xbox and a PlayStation 2 controller, and aiming with those things is like trying to do calligraphy with a dog turd. Even if you do die, you get these things that can revive you when your health runs out, giving you a second or even a third chance. So you really almost have to try to want to see a game over screen. The PC port is the version I played, and what you get is a pretty solid PC port for the most part. I had a couple of crashes throughout the campaign, but nothing major. I think my real issue with the PC port is that playing it in widescreen messes up all the cinematics, as you've probably noticed in some of the video footage I've used. A lot of games that were designed in those 4:3 ratios kinda cheated with their letterboxes by just having black bars at the top and the bottom of the screen. And this is fine if you're playing it in the aspect ratio that's intended, but when you start watching it from a resolution that wasn't intended, it kinda spazzes out a bit.
Something wrong, Lieutenant? I'm fine.
You can get the game as a digital download on Steam, or be a gaming hipster like me and buy a physical copy off a site like eBay for less than $10. Either way, while the campaign lasts, Project Snowblind is a pretty damn good time. It's a shame there's no real reason to revisit the campaign once you've finished it, or any kind of multiplayer mode to dip your cybernetically enhanced toes into. But it stands on its own 2 feet as it is, as a pretty solid shooting game with a good mix of gameplay mechanics and a well-told story. Definitely worth checking out.